We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 87a. The Mishnah continues to detail which kinds of wine can be used for Nesachim and which cannot. And the Mishnah said on the previous Amud, we don't bring from the mouth of the barrel, and that's because of Hakemach, and that's because of the mold. And the Mishnah continues, Velo Mishuleh, we also don't bring from the bottom, Mipnei Hashmarim, that's because of the sediment. Elamevi Mishlisha Me'emtza, rather we bring from the barrel's middle third. There are a couple of ways of understanding what this line means. One explanation is it's the middle third of the barrel and then the middle of that. That's what Rashi Ksaviyad says. The difficulty with that is then it could have just said the very middle of the barrel. The Rishash says it means the third, and which third? Me'emtza, from that middle third. And the Mishnah continues, Keitzad hu bodek. Now, how does he inspect? How does he examine it and make sure that it's not impure? HaGizbor Yoshev, the Gizbor, the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash, he sits. V'hakona biyado, when there's a reed in his hand. Zorak Hagir, when the barrel begins to discharge the froth of the sediment. So then Hikish Bekona, then he strikes with the reed, he taps with the reed. Some say he's tapping the individual who is controlling the spigot. Some say he's tapping on the barrel. In any case, he indicates that that is where the individual has to stop releasing that wine. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, Sheyesh bo kemachin pasel, if it has mold, then it is invalid for nesachim. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Temimim yu lachem minchasam, Temimim yu lachem v'niskeyim, it mentions the mincha, mentions the nesachim, and the idea over here is again that it is invalid, it's considered to be like a blemish if it has mold, and that's why Temimim yu lachem, it has to be essentially unblemished. And Rashi Ksaviyad explains, Mishlisha shel chaves, from the third, again the middle third of the barrel, Sheosa barza bedafnos achaves, he makes a spigot over there. V'hakona amas hamida, the kona is the amas hamida, again that's this reed that he's using. Zorak hagir, when the froth starts to come out, so then kishahagir shel shmar miyotzim and hayayin, at that point in time, when the froth is released, v'hikish bekona, then he strikes with that reed. Hikish hagizbar bekona es motze hayayin, he strikes the individual who is operating the spigot. V'romez lo, and that's a way of hinting Tim Sheit and Habarza that he should stop the flow. V'lo hayamedaber, now he didn't speak. Why? Lefisha hadibor raliyayin, as we will see, speaking is bad for the wine. And then it said Temimim yu lachem minchasam, by the mincha it has to be Temimim. That's prat lesoles hisliya, that's to exclude flour that has worms, v'sha'alabo avok, or if there is dust. And then again the same idea with regards to the wine. And the Gemara begins by quoting the Mishnah, Ein mevian lo masuk v'lo mevushel v'lo me'ushan, one does not bring sweet or cooked or smoked wine. V'im hevi pasel, and if he brings that wine, it's pasel, it is disqualified. V'hakatani reisha, so the Gemara asks, but didn't it say in the beginning of the Mishnah, Ein mevian es halistion, you don't bring halistion, v'im hevi kosher, and if that is brought, it is kosher, and that essentially is the same thing, that's also sweet wine. So the Mishnah says it's pasel by masuk, and then the Mishnah says that halistion is kosher if it's brought. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Ravina, Ravina says, Kroch Vitani, you have to turn the Mishnah all into one statement, and there's a discussion among the Rishonim what exactly that one statement will be. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Ravashi says, Chulyo de Shimsha lo mois. There's actually a difference between the case of the Helistion and the case where it's sweet. And the difference is that sweetness by the sun, which is Helistion, that is lo mois, that's not disgusting, that's why I'm heavy kosher. If he brings that, it is kosher. But Chulyo de Peira, however, if it is sweetness that is because of the fruit itself, so then moist, that is considered to be disgusting. And Rashi Ksaviyad explains, V'amrid Reisha, you said in the beginning of the Mishnah, B'helistion, by helistion, im heavy kosher, that if that's brought, it's kosher. V'hadratani b'masuk, im heavy pasel, then it says by the masuk, by the sweet wine, that if it's brought, it's pasel. And the first answer was Kroch V'tani, it's all one statement. Helistion, masuk b'hadadi, put them together. And the way Rashi Ksaviyad understands, V'tana b'tarvayu, im heavy pasel. By both of them, it should say that if that is brought, it is pasel. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ein mevi and yashan divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says you can't bring old wine. The Chachamim machshir, but the Chachamim say that's kosher. And the Gemara says, Amar Chizkiya says, my time at the Rebbe, what's the reason of Rebbe? Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, La keves yain. It says, La keves yain. It puts the word keves, which is a lamb, next to yain, which is wine. Keves is 1 year old. Ma keves ben shanaso, just like a keves is 1 year old. Af yain ben shanaso. So too, it has to be wine that's that year, so it cannot be old wine. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ima keves ben shtei shanim pasel, if you're going to compare it to a keves, so if it's 2 years old, it's disqualified. Af yayin, so by wine too. Ben shtei shanim pasel, we should argue that if it's 2 years old, it's disqualified. Now, if you're going to say hachinami, that indeed is the case. V'atanya, but we learned in a brayse, yayin ben shtei shanim lo yavi, one shouldn't bring wine that's 2 years old. However, vim hevi, if he does bring it kosher, then it's kosher. And so therefore, it's not exactly a parallel to keves. And the Gemara continues, Man shamatli damar lo yavi. Now, who's the one that says lo yavi, one shouldn't bring the wine that's 2 years old? It's Rebbe. That would be Rebbe. The Kamar, and yet it says over here, Hevi kosher, that if it is brought, then it's kosher. And so again, that's going to be problematic if the reason of Rebbe is learning from Kevis. If that was the reason, it should be possible. It should be Hevi pasul. And so the Gemara instead gives another reason, Elam Rava. Rather, Rava says, Hainu time of the Rebbe. The reason of Rebbe actually is Dechsiv, because it's written in the pasuk in Mishlei Altera Yayin Ki Yasadam. Do not look upon wine when it's red. And the point of bringing this pasuk in Mishlei is the idea is that when wine is red, when it's that color, that's when it is the finest, and that's why lechatchila it should be brought at that point in time, and that again is when it is new wine. And the meaning of the pasuk is one should stay away from wine when it's most red. That's when it's most intoxicating. The idea is that one should stay away from sin. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Ein mevi'in lo min hadloyos. One shouldn't bring from the grapes which are on the vines that are suspended, but rather from the trailing vines. And then the Mishnah said it should be from cultivated vineyards. And so the Gemara says, Tana was taught, Kromim ha'avudim pa'amayim b'shana. That refers to those vineyards which are dug twice a year. Those are the cultivated vineyards. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Rav Yosef havale karna de pardes. Rav Yosef had a corner of a pardes, a corner of a vineyard. The Rafik beit fei, Rivka, and he would dig into it, an extra digging. He did that extra digging, that extra cultivation. V'avar chamra dedori maya al chatrein, and because of that, his land produced wine that was able to sustain a dilution of 2 parts water for every 1 part of water that was used to dilute regular wine, meaning to say it was a higher quality wine. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Lo yukonsen osan bechatzavin gedolim. It says they wouldn't place the wine in large casks, but rather in small barrels. And the Gemara says, Tana, it was taught, chavios, kadios, ludios, uveinonios. What that means is that they would use these small barrels, which really were medium-sized Ludian jugs. That's the kind that were used. And ein manichan osan shtayim, shtayim. Furthermore, we don't place the barrels 2 by 2, meaning we don't place them next to each other. That also can ruin the wine. Ela achas, achas. Rather, we place them 1 by 1. We place them on their own. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Keitzad bode gizbor yoshev ekana biyado zorak agir hikish begana. Again, it says, how does the temple treasurer, how does he examine the wine? He would sit with the reed in his hand, and when the barrel discharged the froth of the sediment, so that's when he would tap with the reed. And the Gemara says, Tana was taught, Zarak hagir shel shmarim. Again, when the froth starts coming out, gizbor hikish bekana, he would strike with the reed. That's what the treasurer would do. And so the Gemara asks, V'lei molei meimar. Why doesn't he just say that he should stop? What does he have to tap for? And the Gemara says to that, Messiah leil Rabbi Yochanan. This supports Rabbi Yochanan, Damar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, Kashem shadibor yafal lebesamim. Just like speech is actually good for besamim, it's beneficial for spices. Kach dibor ra leyayin. So to the opposite with wine, when one speaks, it's actually bad for the wine. So it's bad to talk. It's going to be bad for the quality, and therefore he would use the kana. He would use the reed. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda says that wine that contains mold is invalid. And the Gemara says, Boy, Rabbi Yochanan asked the following question. This is similar to the earlier Gemaras, similar Gemaras. Hikdishu mao sheyilka olav mishum bal mum. If somebody would sanctify such wine which is disqualified, so would that be malchus for essentially being makdish something that has a blemish? This wine has a blemish. Kevan de pasal kebal mum dami. Since it is disqualified, that's like having a blemish. O dilmor, maybe ein bal mum ela bebehema. Maybe the concept of blemish only applies by an animal. And the Gemara says, the Gemara leaves this as a question. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in a brisa, elim mimoav. It means to say that the choicest rams for sacrifices, they were obtained from Moav, and kivasim mechevron, kivasim, which are lambs, the choicest were obtained from Chevron, and agolim misharon, that's the calves, they were obtained from Sharon, and gozalos mehar hamelech. Gozalos refers to the birds that are used for karbanos, and those were obtained from Har HaMelech. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mevi'in kvasim shegavon kerachvon. We bring lambs that their height is like their width. There are other interpretations as well. Rashi Ksav explains, Shegavon Karachvan, their height is like their width, which means Sheyehei Rechavin Meirov Shamnan, they're very wide because they're so fat. And Lishnachrin, another way of understanding, Rechavim Garcinan Sheyeh Gabeim Rechavin, it means to say their backs are wide. That's the reference of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava bar Rav Shila. Rava bar Rav Shila says, my time at Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Tichsiv, because it's written in the Pasuk, Yira Miknecha Bayomahu Karnerchav, and that means that your livestock will graze on that day a broad lamb. Again, a reference reference to this idea of Gavon Kirachvan. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Ksiv, it's written in the Pasuk, Al Chomosayich Yerushalayim Hifkarati Shomrim, Kol Hayom V'Kol Halayla Tamid Lo Yechashu, Hamazkirem Es Hashem Al Domi Lochem, the translation of the Pasuk, upon your walls, Yerushalayim, have I posted guardians all the day and all the night, continuously, they will never be silent. You who remind Hashem, be not silent. And the Gemara says, My Amri, so what do those guardians say? The Gemara says, Hachi Amar Rava Bar Rav Shila, this is what Rava Bar Rav Shila says, Ato Sokum Terachim Tzion, they say you will arise and show mercy, show Tzion mercy. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem, they say the builder of Jerusalem is Hashem. And so the Gemara continues and asks, that's good after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but Umei Karamai Have Amri, but what did they say originally? What did they say before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rava Bar Rav Shila, Rava Bar Rav Shila says, Ki vachar Hashem b'Tzion Iva l'Moshev Lo, for Hashem has chosen Tzion, he has desired it for his dwelling. And Rashi Ksaviyat explains, Mayamri Hanach Shomrim, what do these guards say? D'chsev Lo Yechashu, it says, don't be silent. Umeikara, and originally, Kodem HaChurban May Have Amri, what did they say before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? And again, the Gemara said, Ki vachar Hashem b'Tzion Iva l'Moshev Lo, Hadron Aloch Kol Karbonos HaTzibur, we will return to you, Kol HaKarbonos Tzibur. This is the end of the 9th parak of Meseches Menachos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 10th parak of Meseches Menachos. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, Shtei midos shel yavesh hayu b'mikdash. There were two dry measures in the Beis HaMikdash, and they were the isaron v'chatzi isaron. One measured an isaron, which is the amount for most menachos, and one measured a half isaron, a chatzi isaron. Rabbi Meir says, isaron v'chatzi isaron. There actually were two isarons, and then there was a chatzi isaron as well. Isaron ma'haya meshamish. Now, what was the isaron used for? Shebo haya moded l'chol ha'menachos. That was used to measure all menachos, which were one isaron of flour. Lo haya moded lo b'shlosha lapar v'lo b'shal shnayim la'ayel. Even though, with regards to certain menachos, it was 3 isaron or 2 isaron, they didn't use a measure of 3 for the bull. They didn't use a measure of 2 for the ayel. Elamodedon esronos. Rather, they would measure them as isarons. In other words, they would measure 3 isarons, and that would be for the par, etc. And chatzi isaron ma'haya meshamish. And what did they use the half isaron for? Shebo haya moded chavise kohen gadol. That's what they used to measure the mincha of the kohen gadol. It was an isaron, but half of it was brought in the morning and half was brought in the evening, and so they needed that half isaron measure. Mechsa baboker umechsa ben harbayim. Again, half in the morning and half in the afternoon. And Rashi Ksaviyat explains, lo b'shel shlosha lapar. They didn't have a measure of 3 for a bull. The minchas nesachim shel par. That means for the minchas nesachim of the bull. D'chsib be'shlosha esronim lapar. It says in the pasuk 3 esronim lapar. Ha'echad lo haya moded b'mido achas. They didn't use one measure that was 3 esronim. Shetei machzek shlosha esronim. Elo hayasham mida meisaron. Rather, what they did was they used the isaron, and they were able to get the 3 from that isaron. Modedon esronos isaron b'fnei atzmo. Again, they measured each isaron on its own. Hachi garsim asnisan bo hayu modedin lechavise kohen gadol. Again, the half isaron that was used for the chavise kohen gadol. And the Gemara says Tanya was taught in a brayso. Hayer Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir would say matamad lomar isaron lakeves achad. Why does the pasuk say isaron? It says it twice. Lakeves achad. Milami. This teaches shtei esronos hayu b'mikdash, that there actually were 2 isaron measures in the Beis HaMikdash, and echad gadush, one was heaped, v'echad mochak, and one was not heaped. It was exact. Gadush shebo haya moded l'chol hamenachos. The gadush was used for all menachos. And Rashi Ksaviyat explains echad gadush haya katan. The gadush was actually the smaller isaron. V'lo haya machzik kashu gadush ela kashir chaveru hamochak. When it would be a little bit heaped in that measuring vessel, it would actually be the same amount as the one that was mochak. Ulahachi echad gadush v'echad mochak. And the reason why one was gadush and one was mochak, to Rabbi Meir svir le Gemara, because Rabbi Meir had a tradition to shtei midos shel isronos haya b'tzibur, that there were 2 measures of isronos that were for the communal offerings. V'shneim shavin, now for them both be exactly alike, havalim midachas, that would essentially be the same thing. So that would not make sense. Essentially, it's a tradition for Rabbi Meir, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pezayin Amid Beis.